Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name's Daniel Mann. I'm the principal of the college, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all here this evening for our discussion. For those that have never been to the college before, a particularly warm welcome to you. For those that haven't been back to the college for a while, welcome back. Tonight's discussion is very much reflective of who we are as a school. And as a school steeped in the Ignatian tradition, we value deep discernment. And our hope this evening is our discussion will inform your own discernment as we head to our national referendum. I have also the pleasure this evening to invite Len Collard, who's going to welcome us to country. And for those that don't know Len is a Whadjuk Noongar traditional owner of Perth metropolitan area and is also the adjunct professor at the Nguangli Research Institute at the University of Notre Dame. Len's groundbreaking research around decoding Noongar place names of the southwest of Australia has significantly added to Noongar cultural research on the local, national and international stages. I've also learnt this evening that Len's a keen surfer as well, and he's broken 2 boards just the other day. So it's a real honour to have Len welcome us to country. And after Len has done that, we're actually going to throw to our compere this evening, who's James Back. And until then, I really hope you enjoy your evening.
Oh, thank you, Daniel, for that lovely welcome here to John the 23rd. So, Nicha Buja, Ngala Murangin Bridia, wa Ngala Nope Nilalang Wajalap, Bujara, Nunaka Karicha Fremantle, Ngan Murangin Bal Wangin Ngan, Budaleni Nunaka Wood Colling, Yao Colling, Ngadi Colling, Euro Colling, Ninalang, Bola Wajala Marman. Yoga bal kulin ni na nuno kada wangin. Borwan nuno kada wot kulin ya wanga niche nyonga da and bola da wanga nuna bridia niche barangin ya wot kulin. So one of the things that my old people taught us when we were kids growing up in Waikam Valley was that we had to go to school to learn about whitefellas, to understand how they think, what their language is and what their mores are. And so I didn't really realise that my old people were teaching me to be a Wadgerologist. Does anyone know what a Wadgerologist? It's a Noongar that studies white people. And so as I went along, I realised what the old people were saying is that never give up your language, because your language is a sovereign sign about your unceded territories and your unceded conversations. This indeed is the land of the Noongars, and I'm a descendant of those people, and we never ceded our sovereignty. We never signed anything over to anybody. And some people have said to me, but we beat you in the war. Well, the war's still going because we haven't signed off on it yet. And the war now manifests in weird things. Things like, as Australians, there's a question coming up for us about the war of the minds and the war of feelings and emotion, and the war to stamp indeed what it means to be an Australian. Because whichever way people vote, it's not my job to tell you how to vote, it's my job to say, please consider it, and you make the choice that you believe and feel is the right choice for Australia. A couple of important things that I've listened to, as a part of the Uluru Statement, is the idea that somehow or other the nation's going to be split on the basis of race. Well, the fact of the matter is we already are a nation built on race. And in the 1901 Federation, the year of the Federation, it was in there that it said that the federal system would be charged to make special laws for Aborigines. So, when you think about the war as I talk about it, it's the war of the minds. It's the war of the intellect. It's the feelings and the emotion to win the hearts and minds. If you're a yes voter, to win those hearts. If you're a no voter, you'll fight just as hard to convince your colleagues to stick with the no vote. So with the, when I was a young bloke, and growing up in Wycombe, and eventually I, went to school, and always the question was always about what colour I was. And so often I remember people saying to me, "But you don't look like an Aborigine." And I didn't know what an Aborigine looked like. But people imagined that we're supposed to look like whatever they imagined it was. And I just said, and I used to say, well, all I know is that in the house where I live, we speak a particular language. And when I went to Wycombe Valley Primary School, I couldn't understand what the teacher was talking about. And yet I lived in a brick house with a asbestos roof. It was private property that my mum and dad bought, just like any other Australian, to make sure they secured one of the essential values of an Australian is to own your own home. And inside that house, it was kind of a watershed place where we always conspired to speak our language. And so the blessing was, to become a Wadjarolist was to go to school to learn about whitefellas and how they think, why they behave the way they do, what language they speak, and things of that ilk. So by the time I decided to go to university, and I launched my career in academy. And I did work at WACA, I did work at ECU, I did work at Curtin, I did work at Notre Dame, and eventually I became a Winthrop professor at UWA. And it's ironical that still today the conversations we have as Australians about really important and essential dialogue is coming to a bit of a watershed, I feel. But at the end of the day, I'm not here to tell you which way to vote. I'm just saying make sure that you exercise your vote in an informed way. And whether you vote yes or no, it's your call. We live in a liberal democracy, and you're allowed to disagree, and you're allowed to tick the yes box, and you're allowed to tick the no box. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's still our country, and we're still the sovereign owners, and we're not flexible, and we're not bending on that. Finally, I think the couple of the other ones, this issue about the heritage stuff that's come up, people are really scared about whatever they're imagining. And always remember, what you imagine is what you're imagining. It might have nothing to do with what's actually going on. But at the end of the day, again, the Heritage Acts, some people see it as dumbing down on Noongar authority, and others see it as a liberating tool to bring equity to the table, because I think Australians like to think of ourselves as a classless society, which isn't the case, we know that. But rest assured, we're in for big changes, and good luck. When's the vote coming up, James?
We think it'll be October, November.
All right, whenever that is. Probably see you there, and at the end of the day we'll find out what the will of the people under our Australian democracy is. I'm going to play a little tune on the didgeridoo. Now, I was going to stay, but I just want to make a really weak excuse. On Saturday I went surfing all day at Rottnest. My wife said you can go surfing, but you come home, you put your best suit on and your best smile, and you come to the ball for NAIDOC week. So remember, folk, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get to bed until 1 o'clock that day. I got up in the morning, I went home, I had a nine, I tried to rest up. My mate rang me yesterday and said, mate, we're going to Rotto again, you coming? So off I went, got up at 4 o'clock, I was there all day, I broke 2 boards, and you know what? I'm plumb burned. And so, and I apologise to James that I would have loved to have stayed and hear one of the preeminent men, the Jesuit priest, Father Brennan, who's always been an iconic individual, I think. I think the federal minister on the left over there, Fred's niece, Freddie's niece. Yeah, mine's going blank. One of my alumni students, Ewan, Mr. Ewan, of course the man himself. Kelsi's another one of my students from UWA. Collene's one of the guresses in and around the traps. And of course James are doing it beautifully. And I've got to mention Mrs. Forrest over there, who's been one of the foremost innovators in education and culture in and around the traps. So I know it's a weak excuse, but I'm going to finish off the tune with a blessing on the didgeridoo. And I just want to do that because I think the Kwop Wiran, or what Noongar's call the good spirit, is indeed something which we need to bring to the event tonight, because I know they've got plenty of insights which will bring up plenty of questions, and I'm hoping that it will resolve some of the questions you might have in your mind. Finally, I'm going to do a little exercise, and I'm going to do it before I leave. So I want everybody to stand up, and we've got to practice a little... this is a shout of joy, joyfulness, and like, you know, remember back in the days when the Eagles used to win? Well, Freo hasn't quite got there yet, but one day we will. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a little Noongar phrase. And I want everyone to practice it. We're going to do the first word, woola. Woola. Come on, from the stomach. Woola. Woola. And I want you to finish with wah. Right, so woola is a shout of joy. It's mainly used when your footy team wins, or, you know, you've won lotto, or, you know, you get a new boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. So woola is that shout. And the wah is like the breath. So the breath of joy. Right, now what you've got to do is you've got to go woola, woola. Right, one more time. Woola! I tell you what, James, they reckon those eastern suburbs... Well, I live in the eastern suburbs, but I live down... So thanks, everybody. If you take your chair, I'm going to finish off with a little tune on the didgeridoo to bring the Kwop Wiran, or the good spirit. And I just want to say thanks for the speakers, and I'll hear more about it, I think.
Beautiful.
But as I say, it's a really bad excuse. But I'm serious, I'm plumb tuckered out, and I'm going to go home. I'm going to feed my dog, and I'm going to fight the pillow for about a minute.
Okay, can you all hear me? Excellent, fantastic. My name's James Back, and it's been absolutely wonderful. I work with Colleen and Natalie as Wannell partners. Wannell is the peppermint tree, commonly the English word, peppermint tree. The Noongar word for it is Wannell. And Natalie, Colleen and I each have a very intimate relationship with the Wannell tree, and it was flowering at the time our business was born. And we thought it was a really beautiful symbol of the work that we wanted to take into our community. So we're all deeply committed to reconciliation, and the Wannell tree is used for purposes, ceremonial purposes and healing purposes, and the reconciliation journey for Australia is a deep healing journey that we're all on at the moment, and we're gathered here to learn more about that today. We're really proud to be working with John 23rd, and we're very grateful for the college and the college leadership for giving us the opportunity to bring tonight together. So the last day and a half, 2 days, we've been working with the college staff on a reconciliation journey, and you'll see one of our parking slides here, Danju Kulani. It means walking together. And we're walking together into our future, and it's been a really powerful few days. The staff have embraced the discussions, at times very confronting discussions, openly and willingly and with a sense of authenticity and integrity that is nothing but rich. And we're really excited. I think we're sitting on really fertile ground for a very bright future here. And we're calling you as the JTC community together to hear from some expert people who have lifetimes of lived experience being Aboriginal people in the context of modern day Australia, and people like Fr Frank and Kate Chaney who have deep commitments to the Aboriginal community and justice outcomes. So before we dive into tonight, and I appreciate it's a very short time, I just wanted to say thank you to Len in his absence, but that will chase him down the road. He's welcomed to country, called away the bad spirits, and he welcomed into that vacuum the good spirits, for us to have a rich and respectful conversation this evening. It's not our intent to convince you to vote yes. It's not our intent to convince you to vote no. Dare I say it, we all sit up here with hope and aspiration for a brighter, equitable future and for our true identity to be born as a nation. We're here to give you information to help you make a good decision for our nation's future. Len used the word Buddhia, leader, boss man. You all sit here as Buddhias. You're going to put pen to paper, and that's going to be a yes vote or a no vote, and you will demonstrate your leadership in our nation's future, and that's an exciting opportunity. So some quick housekeeping for you all before I do move on. Please set your phones to silent, put them in your pocket, turn vibration off. I'm not sure if the college has a fine for loud phones, but please don't be that person.
This phone's back.
That's mine, it's on silent. I need that for timing, Cole, I need that for timing. Folks, the closest restrooms are just here, so if you do need the restroom, please feel free to hop up and use it. In the event of an emergency, please listen to the directions of staff and exit out through the clearly marked exit doors, which are at the back and over at the entrance where you came in. The assembly point is on the lawn in front of the new administration building, which I'm sure you've all seen over there. All of the college staff are trained for any emergencies, so please follow their instructions. If you have any concerns, please talk to them. Please also note that the session's being recorded, so you can see our faces up here. There's a few slides that'll come through, but there are a few people taking pictures and recordings of this evening's conversation, and the college will discern how that's used moving forward. So if there's anyone objected to that, can I just ask you to make yourself known so that we can not include you in those recordings? Everyone's happy? Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm now going to ask the college students just to come forward who've been asked to recite the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Tonight's the culmination of Danju Cooloney, the staff joining Wannell partners in a conversation about reconciliation and moving forwards together. And back in 2018, in May 2017, the Uluru Statement was born. And it's the culmination of the aspirations of Aboriginal Australia. 384 countries, 272 people representing those countries came together in Uluru, and the Uluru Statement was born. It wasn't published as a political document. It was given to Malcolm Turnbull, but it was an invitation for all Australians. I think it's really important that all Australians hear that invitation. At the moment, the statistic stands at 1 in 7 Australians have read this document, which now has 6 years behind it. So I'd like those college students who were asked to read the statement to just stand up and begin reading that, please.
Our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under our own laws and customs. This our ancestors did. according to the reckoning of our culture from the creation, according to the common law from time immemorial, and according to science more than 60,000 years ago.
This sovereignty is a spiritual notion. The ancestral tie between the land, or Mother Nature, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who were born therefrom remain attached thereto, and one day must return thither to be united with our ancestors. This link is the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty. It has never been ceded or extinguished, and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown.
How could it be otherwise? That people possessed the land for 60 millennia, and this sacred link disappears from world history in merely the last 200 years. With substantive constitutional change and structural reforms, we believe this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australia's nationhood.
Proportionally, we are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We are not an innately criminal people. Our children are alien from their families at unprecedented rates. This cannot be because we have no love for them, and our youth languish in detention in obscene numbers. They should be our hope for the future. These dimensions of our crisis tell plainly the structural nature of our problem. This is the torment of our powerlessness.
We seek constitutional reforms to empower our people and take a rightful place in our own country. When we have power over our destiny, our children will flourish. They will walk in two worlds, and their culture will be a gift to their country.
We call for the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, the coming together after a struggle. It captures our aspirations for a fair and truthful relationship with the people of Australia and a better future for our children based on justice and self-determination.
We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history.
In 1967, we were counted. In 2017, we seek to be heard. We leave base camp and start our trek across this vast country. We invite you to walk with us in the movement of the Australian people for a better future.
Beautiful. So that document was served to Parliament on May 26 in 2017, and I consider it a really seminal statement that's representative of Aboriginal Australia. It comes from a place of sense and humility and reason. It's a generous invitation for us to walk in partnership with Aboriginal Australia moving forwards. We've provided you all with a copy of the statement. We ask you to take it home as a reminder of this evening, to put it on your fridge, and to use it as a tool, as a vehicle for you to have conversations with your family, with your friends, with your sporting clubs, with the places you cherish spending time, and help inform other people's thinking, thought processes, their decisions. Okay. So this is a really important place for us to start our conversation about the voice. Joining us this evening, we have some great minds and some good hearts who are invested in your college community. This evening, as I said, we'll be objective about the information that we present to you, and it's our intent to represent both sides of the debate. It's not our intent to influence the way you front up on polling day. Rather, we're here this evening to inform you, to challenge your thinking, and to activate you ahead of this referendum. The school's values, love and service for others, and care and respect are embedded in this evening's event. To honour the school's motto and the Jesuit purpose, we're here to help you seek justice as a Jesuit community. We want this space and this evening to be safe and respectful. We'll manage the event accordingly. We're gathered tonight here with these great minds and good hearts to explore the upcoming referendum. The question to be put to the Australian people is this. Sorry, I'll put our IT friends on the spot here. To alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this proposed alteration? Yes or no? So we'll leave that up there for a few moments so you can reflect on that. And I'd like you to meet Collene Castle, Kelsi Forrest, Fr Frank Brennan, Tyson McEwan, and Chaney. I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to ask them to spend 5 to 7 minutes just talking about them and their relationship with the Uluru Statement and the Voice. And we will then have some questions of each of them, and then we'll open the questions to the floor, and we'll conclude just before 8 p.m. if that works for everyone. Great. So, Colleen.
Oh, thank you,
Welcome.
James. Thank you. So before I start, I also too want to thank the college for the last 2 days that I have spent here, and also for Fr Frank Brennan for all the blessings and the prayers that you have given me and my community over the last 2 days, and it's just been truly inspirational, and it's really put me at peace with a lot of the struggles that I'm currently having in terms of the future. For my children and my grandchildren, and you have given me so much hope over the last 2 days. It's just been really uplifting for me, and I went home to my family last night, and they noticed a difference already in my attitude and the way that I was thinking. So I am a Menang Ngaju woman from the Great Southern of Western Australia. My country comes from as far across from Esperance down to Albany. The Fitzgerald National Park is our country, which we're very, very proud of. Our family have lived and camped and hunted those grounds for many, many years. I was born to a white father and an Aboriginal Noongar woman. So I consider myself to have reconciliation in my DNA. So I've been very, very fortunate to be brought up in two worlds. However, I am a product of the 1960s and 1970s, probably the darkest days in our history. I grew up with intense racism, poverty, discrimination, disadvantage. We lived a simple life in the bush. The reason being was that my father, being a white man, chose not to live in town around civilisation, which gave access to the police and authorities to take his children away from him. So he actually hid us in the bush. So we travelled throughout the bush, and he built us primitive shelters. But the good thing about my father's mind is he thought like a white man, and he taught us kids to think like a white man. So he was always one step ahead of the authorities. He too suffered incredible abuse and very, very badly treated by the police back then. Now, this is our shared history. It's not my history, it's not your history. This is our shared history, and this is what Australia was like back then. So I don't want people to feel any guilt or blame. I want you to embrace our history and understand and acknowledge this is what happened in the past, and so that we don't let it happen in the future. But I was, when I was born, the 1905 Act was still in place. That 1905 Act told authorities that they could take children away from their parents or steal them away. And unfortunately, how many of you have seen a recent movie called The Last Daughter? So that is about a young girl that got given away. And I see a difference with being taken or stolen and being given away. So that is actually my story. I was given away. I was sent to a hospital. My father and mother rang up to find out how I was up here in Perth. And they were told that there was no one there by that name. So my father got on the bus, horse and cart to Albany, on the bus up to Perth, and demanded that they'd tell him where his daughter was. Thank God he actually got me. But I can let you know now that if he wasn't a white man, he wouldn't have found me. I would have been lost to the system. So I was given to a very rich family, and I laugh about it now, but when I returned home, I spoke like a poem, apparently. But you know, the story that young lady had in the last order about wanting to find her white family. So I went through all of that. The unfortunate thing, the family that I found wasn't the family that I thought I had. So I actually found a totally different family, and I was told that I was actually given away to two families. So I've been through that journey, and I'm still going through it. But I guess, you know, growing up in that racism in a small town called Jerramung up in the south of WA, let me tell you, we can still go back to that town this very day, and those people that called me awful, awful names and called my family awful, awful names, we actually call them brother and sister now. So that's how far we have worked on our journey in reconciliation, and it is possible. Anything's possible. Yeah, I think in terms of, you know, the voice, I get very, very emotional about the voice, because being born in 1961 and growing up through all the legislations and the acts that have controlled Aboriginal people, I get to this point now where I see my children and my grandchildren actually being able to be in control of their destiny, and not a government agency, not a commissioner of Native Affairs. And now I just think this is an incredible opportunity for my children. So this is not about me, by the way, not about me at all, because I'm getting old, and you know, by the time the impact of this referendum takes place, it'll be a long way off. It won't have any effect on me, but it will on my children and my grandchildren. And I think that's what we all need to think about in the room. It's not about us, it's about the generation behind us and those beautiful young people that got up and read the Uluru Statement from the Heart. You really touched me here. And all I can say is, my motto, my mantra, is think with a smart mind and a warm heart.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you. Kelsi.
Hi everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging country and Noongar language, something that Uncle Len said spurred me to do it. Being a sovereign Noongar person sitting here today, I thought it would be important for myself to speak in Noongar language, because I have been fortunate enough to be on a journey of relearning my grandparents' language, something which unfortunately my parents and grandparents had systematically taken away from them. So here goes. Nyang karich Noongar mort, ken karak nija wanjak Noongar buja, nyang karich nija Noongar buria, korye, border balapan morich Noongar karajan, mort were buja. Acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and respect my Wajak Noongar family, present and emerging leaders, our continuing cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, which continues to be as important today as it was in the past. I'd just like to acknowledge that Auntie Collene is my mum's sister, so part of her story is part of my story as well, part of my journey. So yeah, as you may have seen in the bios, I'm a Wajak Baladong Menang Noongar woman. My Menang and Nyaju family have been explained by Auntie Collene. On my father's side, I'm Wajak, which is for the Perth area here, and Baladong, which is for a bit further east out over the hills, over Karamunda. And I also have kin connections to Yamaji and Wonga country through my father. I'm a principal at a boutique law firm in the city. I practice in native title, Indigenous legal issues and other Indigenous corporate governance and cultural heritage issues. As Auntie Collene explained, I come from a long line of fighters for Aboriginal rights, not just on that side of the family, but on my father's side of the family. My grandmother on that side, unfortunately, was a member of the Stolen Generations, and we continue to be on a journey to take back what was hers in terms of compensation for stolen wages for when she was placed as a domestic over here in Peppermint Grove in the 30s and 40s. And in terms of my father's parents as well, they were also some of the first Aboriginal people to set up Derbyl Yerrigan, the Aboriginal Medical Service here in Perth. I became involved with the constitutional recognition movement about 10 years ago. I attended a youth forum over East where Julia Gillard attended and raised the first sort of agenda in relation to constitutional recognition of Aboriginal people. Since that point, I've been involved in some of the campaigning that occurred through the Recognise movement, through some road trips and field trips that happened through campaigning throughout Western Australia. I wasn't personally involved in the constitutional conventions that happened recently in 2017, but I have been a long-term supporter and have been on this journey and this movement as a proud Aboriginal person, and it's something that's very dear to me. In addition, I'm a tutor at Curtin Law School, and so I work in the Indigenous Legal Issues department, and we do a whole range of issues, including constitutional law. So I'm very proud to be here tonight, sitting with my auntie, and excited for some really important discussion.
So I'm Frank Brennan. I'm from the East. I don't know that I'm a wise man from the East, but I'm from the East. And great to be with you. I've had a great couple of days here in the college, sharing the platform with Colleen, and always great to come back to John 23rd in seeking justice. Being here this evening, particularly with Kate Chaney here, I was thinking, well, 40 years ago I used to often go to Canberra to meet with the Minister Fred Chaney, because Queensland, my home state, was a difficult state back then. I was just thinking that last month I was invited to a big Aboriginal funeral on Palm Island off Townsville in Queensland. And I was invited there because the man who died, Thomas Geyer, we worked very closely in 1982. And in 1982, Queensland was hosting the Commonwealth Games. That was when you could still afford to run the Commonwealth Games in the state. And we had a colourful premier, Joe Bjelke-Petersen, you might remember, and there were issues about Aboriginal people agitating for land rights. And in those days, the Queensland government used to draw a very clear distinction between the urban Aboriginal people who were troublemakers and who were in the media, and the people who lived on the reserve communities, particularly their elected leaders. So I was appointed as an advisor to the Catholic bishops in Queensland on this issue with the Commonwealth Games coming up, and I travelled around all the communities and found that the elected leaders of those communities were agitating for some recognition of their land rights and for some form of self-determination. But the government was saying, no, they're very happy, they don't want anything. And so we sponsored a meeting on Palm Island of those elected leaders. And Tom Geyer and an offsider of his, Rachel Cummins, who also spoke at the funeral the other day, they went on national television on ABC. And I think it was the first time ever in Australian history that elected community leaders from remote Aboriginal communities went on national television and spoke about the aspirations of their people. And for me, that's the image of what a voice is about. Those people, they did not have any resources and there was no respect shown them, but it was their resilience and courage that gave rise to then the changes that ultimately occurred. So here we are now, we're looking at a constitutional change. We'll discuss something of that tonight. I'm probably a bit different from most, if not all, the others on the panel here tonight. All the others on the panel are very firm yes voters, think that it's wonderful and the words are great, etc. I've been around for 40 years. I think the process could have been better. I think the words could be better. I think Parliament could have done better, etc. But regardless of all that, I unequivocally am committed to voting yes. Now, voices like mine won't be heard in the public square very much because it's going to be the way social media works. It's either you're for yes because it's all absolutely perfect, or you're for no because we're going to hell in a basket. Well, like most things in life, it ain't perfect, but we, the voters, have a very clear choice. Do we vote for something which someone like myself thinks is imperfect, but having listened particularly to Indigenous leaders I trust, I say better off with something imperfect here and now rather than leaving it till when? When are we going to find the political leaders who will make it perfect? When are we going to find the constitutional lawyers who will make it perfect? So we need to do more together to have respectful discussion. And I'd close with this. I'm giving a lot of talks around the country. Any audience falls into three groups. There are those who are for yes, no matter what the words are or whatever, they're for yes. Good luck to them. There are those who are for no. Doesn't matter what flash arguments get put up by even the flashest Aboriginal legal commentators, Marcia Langton, Noel Pearson, Megan Davis, etc., they're for no. Then in the middle are those Australians who are undecided, genuinely undecided. They're the ones who are going to decide this referendum. And they want to be treated with respect, they want good information, they want to be able to make a conscientious decision. And that's what I think a night like tonight should be about. Thank you.
Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay my respects to all elders, past, present and emerging. I'm Tyson McEwan, and originally I'm from Port Hedland, so it's a bit cold for me down here. So originally up there, my mum's side is Karriata, and the Bardi people along the Cape Leveque near Broome. I moved down to Perth in 2015 to study law at UWA. I finished that in December and just started as a graduate at a law firm in Perth. The reason why I kind of got involved with the Uluru Statement from My Heart was in 2019, 2 years after the statement was released to the public, they realised a part of the campaign is that there was no young people there was no forum or a dialogue for young people to be involved. So a call was made to various states to nominate someone or a group of young people in their community who they thought could provide a youth voice to it. And for me, it was a really no-brainer, because myself as a young Australian, I really think about, what this voice means, and, at the end of the day, I'm going to be the one inheriting this beautiful country, and I hope that, I can continue on what's already been made here for generations to come. And a part of being involved in the Uluru Statement from My Heart is that I've been able to speak to people like you, and you guys have invited me to these forums to have these discussions, because I do believe that the young people should be a part of these discussions as well. So I do thank you for the college for inviting me here tonight. Kelsi mentioned she went on a Parliament trip. I was as well on that trip in 2011. I must have been 14 then. And I went to Canberra. It was my first time to Canberra. It was too cold for me, Kate. I was there, and being a part of the process and what it meant, and we were in old Parliament House, and we got to debate and do all the things you do in Parliament. And I never thought from 2011 to now that I would be up here in some form, still a part of that trip, and I've taken those learnings to here. And I really hope that, in future, that young people in the Port Hedland or here in Perth, they get to experience the hope that I got from that trip. And I hope that the voice can be that platform for young people to be involved in this conversation.
Thank you. So I'm Kate Chaney, and I've got a few different hats on today. I'm an ex-student. I'm also a school mum, and I'm also the local MP here in Curtin. So I went to John 23rd, and I really took on board that value of seeking justice. And when I think about where I got my value system from, it was definitely partly my family, some of whom I've seen are here tonight, but also the school. And I don't think you realise until much later in life where your values came from, and or even what they are. But that need to look for the fair way of doing things was very important to me from the beginning. I've worked in a lot of different areas, and my first exposure to Aboriginal affairs was when I was a consultant at Boston Consulting Group, and I went and did a project up in Cape York with Noel Pearson about 20 years ago. And once you see the level of injustice that exists in the country, in the different life outcomes and expectations for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Australia versus the broader community, it's very hard to unsee it. I subsequently then was Manager of Aboriginal Affairs at Wesfarmers when it was the largest private sector employer in the country, and then went on to work in community services at Anglicare WA, where we had partnerships with about 30 Aboriginal community-controlled organisations across WA. I then took an unexpected turn into politics about 18 months ago as an independent. And I, like so many people, really lamented the polarisation that we were seeing in our politics, and found this thing that was happening in our community here where people wanted a more inclusive approach, better long-term thinking, a more positive approach as well, and more compassion. And this came through in the issues that people told me about. And it gave me great hope that there is this sense of justice and compassion and desire for fairness in the community. So I've been a supporter of The Voice for a while, and informed by those experiences. And every role I've worked in that has touched on these issues, I've seen that if you listen to the people affected by something, you get it right more times than not. And so that has been a really big part of how I've ended up being very supportive of this. We are very bad at developing policy to improve the life outcomes for Aboriginal people in this country. And when you're bad at something, you get advice on how to do it better. And it's that simple for me, that this is about listening to advice so that we can actually develop better policies and spend our billions of dollars every year on things that actually work. We've had plenty of past voices that we've done through legislation. And inevitably, when things get tough and they start saying things that are uncomfortable, those voices are abolished. And that's why, to me, it's important that this is actually in the Constitution, because it's a promise to keep listening. Now, what that listening looks like and how that works will change over time, as it should, because we're unlikely to get the model perfectly right now. So the Parliament will make all those decisions about the powers, the procedures, how it actually works. But that promise to keep listening, I think, needs to be in the Constitution so that we can't turn around when it gets tough. And when you're not good at something and you get advice from someone, you don't always like what they've got to tell you, but that's usually when you need to listen to it the most. So that's why I think the constitutional part is important. It's very practical, and Fiona Stanley spoke to me last week at an event about the many examples there are of how we get better outcomes when we actually co-design things with Aboriginal people. And I think this is a really good balance in terms of whether it's too much power or not enough power. It's an advisory body, and Parliament retains the ability to make the laws, develop the policies, and balance the interests of all Australians, including taking that advice into account. I'm really worried about how politicised this has become. And when you look at the history of this, it had multi-partisan support for so much of its journey, both before the Uluru Statement, then coming out of the Uluru Statement, there was a joint select committee that looked at how this could be done, and a co-design plan that was put together, and of co-design process. And was only politicised quite recently, and the wording was developed with constitutional conservatives. I think it's a bit of a worry that it's going down the path of what we see in America in terms of this extreme polarisation and appealing to fear. And fear is a very strong motivating emotion. And so really for me, I think that this is an opportunity for us to show that we can rise above that fear. It's much easier to sow fear and confusion than it is to communicate facts and optimism. And so this is our opportunity to show that we can be brave, we can be bold, we can hope for something better, and we can take this low risk, high return opportunity to recognise and listen so that we can drive better practical outcomes.
Well spoken, Kate. Thank you. Folks, we've just heard the Closing the Gap report. You know, it came out. There's 19 targets that are set in the Closing the Gap report, and only 4 of them were reached in this last year. So, you know, structural change needs to happen, and we need to support that. We can't keep doing and failing. We need to do something differently. There's been 145 formal attempts to change the Constitution, which was born in 1901 with the Prime Minister of the day saying, we will smooth the dying pillow, because the trajectory of Aboriginal Australia was not looking good. There was the 1905 Act, we were going to breed out the black, and that was the birth of the stolen generations. 145 attempts since 1901 to change our Constitution to represent the Australia of the day. 44 of those attempts have gone to the polls and we've voted. Only 8 of those have been successful. We're in a new era and a lot has changed. Tyson, if every Aboriginal person in Australia votes yes for this, which I reckon is unlikely given there's 384 different countries and populations within Australia, are we going to get a yes? Will we get a yes outcome?
I think we will. I think we'll win this thing about winning, and I feel like the voice will get up. And I say that, you know, when the voice does hopefully get up, that that'll be the new beginning. I think that's when the real work begins and the structural change will start to take shape. And I really feel like it's, you know, it's actually that hope that is captured there. And once the bureaucracy is gone, and once we sit down and, you know, everyone can think clearly to how we make this voice together, because we do know what it will look like, because it's just the concept that we have right now. Yep. And so I think once it gets out, they'll be able to, you know, start encouraging that engagement with the community and start getting the right people at the table.
Fantastic. Yep. Kate, Aboriginal people represent about 4% of the population, and 96% of us are non-Aboriginal. What does it mean if all 4% vote yes? Does that drive a yes outcome?
Well, I think, so 2 points on that. 4% won't vote yes, and I think it is important to understand that there are different perspectives, and there are good reasons for Aboriginal people to be suspicious of things that are being offered to them. Right. But the point you make is that this cannot rely on Aboriginal people to get it across the line, and I really feel for the very brave people who are sitting up here, because can you imagine facing the sorts of questions that are being asked and putting your head above the parapet? It is really up to all of us to contribute to this, and it is something that is in the interests of the whole country, not just the Indigenous people of the country. So I think certainly I've thought a lot about how much do I have events where I get Aboriginal people to speak versus actually sharing the load and making sure that we are all feeling responsible for this change and for the potential benefits for the country.
Great, thank you. Collene, can I ask you to extend that a little bit? Your self-determination, how do you feel about that and an equity outcome?
In terms of a yes or a no vote?
Correct, yeah. So
okay.
Yep.
Yep. I actually got asked a question during the two-day conference, how a no vote will affect Aboriginal people in Australia. And I actually got quite emotional about it. I spoke to you before about my life experience and how my family and my people have always been controlled by some legislation, some policy, some commissioner. And we've never really been self-determined and been able to make decisions about our future and particularly a future for our children. Just a simple thing like being able to make Noongar language mandatory in schools for my children and for my grandchildren. Things like that where we can actually take control over those types of decisions. If there is a no vote, sorry, I get really, really emotional about this because I'm talking about my life here and my children, and I actually don't even want to consider what a no vote looks like in Australia. If my country votes no, because what you have to remember is this is not about voting for a voice. This is about putting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Constitution. I mean, that's the bottom line. What the young people read out before, that's all there is. There's no conspiracy. There's no, wanting to overthrow the government. There's no change of monarchy. There's nothing really. All it is an invitation. It's a hospitality invitation to Australia to walk hand in hand with us. That's all it is. The detail that people talk about will come later because there is no detail in the Constitution anyway. But if Australia votes no, that means that you do not want me, my children and my grandchildren mentioned or considered in the Australian Constitution. And if that is the Australia that I know, then I actually don't want to be part of this country. I'm sorry, James. That will be the reality for me, and I think I will actually pull out of society. Yeah. And I am not being dramatic about this at all. This is the one and only chance in my lifetime where I get to see real change for my people. Yeah. Past the '67 referendum, this is the one and only chance that I can actually participate, be involved for the future of my grandchildren, as you all have, your children and your grandchildren. And if this country votes no, I don't even want to think about what it looks like. Yep. That's me.
Okay. Father Frank, there's a spectrum of no voters out there, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal. Can you explore the no vote a little for us? What's informing that? What's driving it?
Well, as I say to non-Indigenous Australians who are undecided, the least you can do in terms of respect is to apprise yourself of the arguments, yes and no, being put by Indigenous people. And I mean, I've done a little book in Indigenous Voice to Parliament, and in that I'm very proud of chapters 7 and 8, which spell out the yes and the no case, where 90% of the quotes are from Indigenous Australians. And I think that that's what's important. So in terms of the no case, as I've heard it from Indigenous Australians, it's a broad spectrum. I mean, at one end of the spectrum, you've got the Lydia Thorpe type approach, haven't you? Which is to say, well, look, this is just more window dressing of a post-colonial society, which isn't sufficiently respectful of our sovereignty and the need to negotiate treaty or whatever. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got Jacinta Price, who says, well, we've had a gutful of these urban, Canberra-based type operations. We don't think they actually deliver on the ground for us in our remote Aboriginal communities. In the middle, you've got your Warren Mundine type approach, which is to say, well, we think it's important to have local voices and even regional voices, But we think national voices is something which, if you look in the past with NAC, ATSIC, Congress of Australia's First Peoples, they always fall over. So, I mean, if you want to look at it dispassionately in terms of Indigenous spokesmen, that's the sort of spectrum. So in the end, I think what those arguments come down to is basically, is this something which will really make a difference? Yes, we don't have all the details about it, but could we be convinced it would make a difference? And so, I mean, to pursue the mundane line slightly further, says, right, you want to talk about the absolutely appalling health statistics? Well, there is the Coalition of Peaks. There is NACCHO, which is the national organisation of the community-controlled health organisations. Now, what would a political national voice add to them? So they're the sorts of things that we hear. Now, I'm not wanting to sound too eloquent about the no case, so might I add that for me, it's that when you then hear other Indigenous spokespeople, like, for example, Patricia Turner, who's a lifelong friend of mine, who heads NACCHO, who's been instrumental in setting up the Coalition of Peaks. I spent 2 years on the Carmel-Langton Committee. There were 18 of us, only 3 of us non-Indigenous, but to hear the many arguments and discussions that went on, when someone like a Pat Turner says, we want and need the voice, then I think they're the sorts of voices to which you need to be attentive. But in terms of giving a dispassionate analysis of the no, I think that's the range of views I've heard from Indigenous voices. I don't think there's really much point in adding to that about what we hear so much from the non-Indigenous voices.
Absolutely, thank you. Kelsi, can I ask you a question with your native title hat on? The Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act in Western Australia was born in 1972, and so I guess this is a place-based application, and a constitutional change requires the majority of people and the majority of states to vote yes, so it's a double majority. It's very, very complex. So to talk at a place-based level, the state government have modernised the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act. That work began in 2018. Juukan Gorge really qualified the significance and importance of that modernisation process. And here we are, July 1, the state government have implemented it. How is that playing out, and how do you feel, what does moving forward look like?
Sure, thanks, James. As a person that represents Aboriginal interests against proponents all across the state of Western Australia, the modernisation of the Cultural Heritage Act was really, really badly needed. As you mentioned, the original one was formed in the 70s as a specific response to mining in a certain area. And it came about and provided some base level protections to Aboriginal cultural heritage and allowed for Aboriginal people to have a say in recognition and protection of our sites of significance, one of which is just over here, Lake Claremont, which I understand some of the teachers of the college were able to have a tour by a Noongar person yesterday. So we were able to provide that base level protection to our sites. And as you mentioned, in 2018, consultations began with Aboriginal people, stakeholders across the state, including proponents and state government agencies. And I think if something like a voice to the West Australian Parliament was in place at that time, it would be really helpful to have a level of transparency on those consultations. Obviously, there was a process that was followed, and I think Aboriginal people, there were some good things and some bad things that came out of those consultations, and ultimately the new Heritage Act provides a much better level of protection for Aboriginal people and a much better process and understanding across the board for all of the stakeholders that are involved in cultural heritage protection. But I think if we had have had something formal set up in terms of a state-based voice, which some of the other states across Australia are considering at the moment, the level of transparency and the messaging around how we see our cultural heritage needs to be protected, I think it would have been much more streamlined and a better process than what's been undertaken today.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks, Kelsi. Can I ask the panel if there's anything you'd like to share ahead of us opening to the audience? All right. Folks, it's an exquisite opportunity to ask some experts about the voice and what it means for Australia moving forward. So we've got a couple of roving microphones. If you have a question of any of the panellists, can I ask you just to put your hand up, and we'll have one of the mics delivered to you. Yep, there's a gentleman just here. Thanks, Lisa.
Father Frank, working?
Just hold it close to your mouth, yeah.
I've prepared a note for this question because I wanted to make sure I could express it adequately. But look, firstly, Father Frank, thank you for your contribution over many years on The Voice. And I particularly appreciate your Newman lecture given last year, where you set out a lot of the history and so forth. In talking to the history of proposals for a voice, you describe how in the initial work there was an awareness in the expert panel for wider community support and a purpose of unifying the nation. Later you explain how in 2018, 18 proposals for voice wording were delivered to the Referendum Council, and the last of them, which now approximates the actual referendum proposal, was adopted. So the question, if you have knowledge on the matter, can you advise on the gist or the thrust of the initial 17 proposals presented to the Referendum Council and how they varied from the final proposal that was accepted? And then, in the light of the initial thinking for voice proposals, how would you characterise the referendum proposal we now have to consider?
Right. Well, there's a lot there, isn't there? So, the first part of your question was about, yes, calls for a bipartisan approach. I mean, as you heard from James, there have been 44 attempts to amend the Australian Constitution, only 8 have succeeded. And those 8 that have succeeded have always had bipartisan support. That is, we've had the Labor Party and the Liberal National Party out there saying to us, the punters, vote for this. This will enhance our constitutional arrangements. So in 2012, there was the expert panel, and it included people who are now household names. People like Megan Davis, Marcia Langton, Noel Pearson, Ken Wyatt, Fred Chaney, I think, was on the 2012 expert panel. They were absolutely agreed when Julia Gillard set up that panel. No point in proceeding with anything unless it's got bipartisan support. Equally, the Referendum Council set up in 2017. Once again, Marcia Langton, Noel Pearson, Megan Davis, etc., saying we adopt the same principles, got to be bipartisan support. But what we then came to with Uluru was that when it was Noel Pearson who first floated the idea of the voice in September 2014, and Abbott was the Prime Minister, and he firmly said no. Then Turnbull became the Prime Minister, firmly said no. Morrison became Prime Minister, firmly said no. And guess what? Peter Dutton was a Cabinet Minister in all 3 of those governments. So what you then had was the lead up to last year's election, and where, in terms of brand clarification or distinction, the Labor Party said we fully embrace the Uluru Statement from the Heart and we'll do something about it. So Albanese, as Prime Minister, is then looking for a circuit breaker, and he needed to find a circuit breaker. And so he went to Gama and he said, right, here is a conversation starter. And he chose, yes, as you rightly said, the 18th of 18 proposals that had been put forward. Now, that was a parliamentary committee in 2018 chaired by the very respected Patrick Dodson and Julian Leeser, who you'd have to say is one of the good guys. And they said in their report, and Linda Burney and Mullendery McCarthy, Minister and now Assistant Minister, they were on that committee. They said, well, we've received these 18, but particularly the 18th one that's come in needs a lot more work, and that work lies ahead of us. But another point strongly made by that committee was they heard from the leading constitutional legal academics. They heard from Anne Toomey, Cheryl Saunders, George Williams, Megan Davis. They all said, look, what you need next is something like a People's Convention or some parliamentary process to get the buy-in, to get people to the table. Well, I think it's unfortunate in that what then happened was that the Labor government decided we think there's not much point in trying to get the coalition on board, and we don't think there's much to be gained by something like a People's Convention. And so the Prime Minister did what I would call a couple of captain's picks. He said, here's proposal number 18, let's put that out there as the conversation starter. And then he said, I'm going to handpick a group of 21 very respected Indigenous leaders and I'm going to deal with them. And then when the wording is finalised, we'll put that out there. Now that's why on the 9th of November last year, I could see the train wreck coming of the breakdown of trust in the community. And so I wrote very directly to the Prime Minister, because I've known him for many years, and I said, isn't it now time to set up a parliamentary process so we can get people to the table? Isn't it now time to try and get a bipartisan approach so you can pick off people like Lisa and Bragg and Bridget Arthur, etc.? But that was delayed until the 4th of April. So what we've got now is, yes, a formula of words which I think does put extra lead in the saddlebags of the yes case and does give extra armoury to the no case. But as I say, no wording is perfect and no process is perfect. So this is what we've got. We're the voters. Regardless of what's been done in the past, we've got to work with what we've got. And that's why I think it's important to say, someone like myself can say, I readily admit that I think there are deficiencies of process and wording, but guess what? I mean, we as Christians, and particularly in the Catholic tradition, know this better than most. Nothing in this life is perfect. And with all apologies to Kate, nothing that comes out of Parliament House in Canberra is perfect. What we've got is something which is imperfect, but it's a choice, as we've heard, between yes and no. And when you hear the Collenes of this world who say what a no will mean, then you say, yes, there may have been a better formulation of words possible, but this is what we've got, so let's deal with it.
Fantastic. Yep, fantastic. And the detail comes in the legislation. I think it's really important that in section 51 of the Constitution, it's a very simple read. It's about the powers of government. And we give them authority to make powers over marriage, over our metric system, over lighthouses and buoys, over quarantine, that enable government to enact what it did through COVID. Marriage, we have already given the power to government to determine what legal marriage in this country looks like. Government could legislate that, and case law then challenges it, and things evolve over time. So what this looks like today is not going to be determined. Rather, a yes or no vote will drive government to legislate and create the opportunity for our nation.
Can I just add to that? I think it's really good to hear that perspective. It's, you know, you could work endlessly trying to build support for things. It's been a very long time coming. The thing that I think is really appealing about this proposal is that it is very simple. We are only enshrining the concept of a voice in the Constitution, and then we're allowing Parliament to work out how that is put together, you know, what the composition is, the powers, the procedures, the processes. And that provides the flexibility while retaining the simple concept. And I think it's really important to remember how simple that idea is, rather than get caught up in how the wording could be a bit better or how the process could have been better. There will always be improvements that you can make, but there is a lot of flexibility built into the model as it is.
Fantastic. Okay, another question. I saw a hand over here. Thanks.
Firstly, just as a white Caucasian male, I just wanted to say I've just found tonight fascinating, so thank you for your insightfulness. Kate, I think you've just answered my question, but I'll ask it anyway. If you take an organisation like the National Indigenous Agency, NIAA, which, as I understand it, I think, am I right, that came in during the Malcolm Turnbull time, I think? It's about 6 or 7 years ago. It has a board of 12 fully paid members. And as I sit around drinking my coffee, a lot of my colleagues have this discussion that we have this organisation that really functions from the Prime Minister's office. It is a voice for our First Nations people. So if the voice, as we're now proposing, gets up, let's hope it does, and without getting too bogged down, how would you actually see that would interface? You know, would this NIA, could you see them having the responsibility to carry the voice forward, or we're going to end up with two separate agencies? And I know that's getting bogged down, but this is a sort of thing that worries people, that whether in terms of legislating and getting the voice going, that it will just get clogged up in bureaucracy and red tape. So I'm just wondering, is it possible someone could just walk us through that a little bit?
Kate, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is the NIAA is a government department, and ultimately it does the work of the government of the day in delivering programs and doing its bidding. This is an independent voice that can tell government what it thinks, even if that's not what government wants to hear. And that's the fundamental difference. I mean, there have been lots of, and there are lots of departments and bodies, but the idea of this is it is protected, it will continue to exist and continue to have that role irrespective of the government of the day. The other difference is that it is representative, so rather than captain's picks or appointees, it will be up to communities around the country to actually choose their own representative in whatever form is appropriate for them. And they are then accountable to their community for their role on The Voice. And so I think that's what gives it its mandate and its uniqueness.
Great.
If you don't mind me adding on to that, Kate, like, I think the two bodies, if you say call one government and one independent, the process of that voice being heard from the government most probably be if it wants to comment on new policy or new laws relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it may make a submission during the inquiry or something, where the voice will actually can make those representations to government. So it's not like they're going to be speaking to the one person themselves. There's two sources, and given that the voice will may make representations to the Parliament and may make representations to the executive, then there's two different bodies as well. So it's almost that it would almost enhance the process a bit more, instead of the government body saying, "Oh, we got referenced in the recommendations," something like that, where at least the voice can actually have a permanent impact.
Yep. And what I take from what you're saying is the voice will enable the mind of government to change, whereas NIAA is currently the arm of government. It's a function of government. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Kelsi.
I was just going to add, James, that's right. I'd see the voice as being the one that informs the government in terms of how the policy is actually implemented. And as Kate mentioned, the NIA has a service delivery function. It's been stated outright that the voice would not be a part of service delivery. And so in terms of Aboriginal people having self-determination and making representations to Parliament and to the Executive about what works best for us, and there are plenty of examples around of programs and things, you know, justice reinvestment initiatives in relation to youth incarceration, situations where funding has been put to Aboriginal organisations, Aboriginal controlled organisations, which works, and people know that it works and community know that it works, and, you know, funding's been taken away at the whim of government. The Executive would be informing bodies like the NIA who implement that policy, that the voice would be informing that and making sure that those sorts of things and those sorts of decisions don't happen where things are working.
Fantastic. I think, you know, we could talk a little about the principles of co-design and co-management, and you know, the policies and practices of past governments have imposed programs on Aboriginal people. This is very much around co-design and building Aboriginal people into our founding document, not bolting them on. And I guess there's an old adage, nothing for us without us. So, you know, this is a great national principle of progress, if you like.
Can I just add, you just mentioned co-design. I think in its simplest terms, what we've done over the last 2 days is co-designed a program with JTC. So we had a group of Noongar people work with Janine and Lisa to actually co-design this wonderful program for the staff conference. And that's exactly what co-design is all about. It's not, you know, it's not the JTC executive or board putting out a program around about NAIDOC and not consulting anybody or not asking Aboriginal people if it's appropriate. It's working with Aboriginal people to actually design a program. So, and it works really, really well, as most of you would have, most of the staff would have seen over the last 2 days. So in its simplest terms, that's what co-design is about.
Can I just add
Kelsi,
one further thing in terms of what you were just talking about, Auntie Colleen, particularly in circumstances where we as Aboriginal people have been systematically denied a voice throughout history. I think that's the thing that is very important in this voice discussion. It's righting the wrongs of the history where we have been denied a place in society and denied our voice in decisions about us.
Beautiful. So the privilege of holding a microphone, I guess, is that I can ask a question here. What does the day after look like, and what does the short, mid and long-term horizons for Aboriginal Australia and our nation look like? Maybe if one of our Aboriginal panel can speak to the Aboriginal component.
I'll talk about the day after a yes vote.
Mm-hmm.
Lots and lots of champagne will be flowing. Who cares about the rest? No, in all seriousness, like we're not going to see any changes. If there is a yes vote, we're not going to see any changes for many, many years, as I mentioned before, and I certainly don't think that I will benefit greatly, but my children and my grandchildren will. So, yeah, I think Australia will remain the same, and we'll continue on our merry way with the NIAA or whatever it's called, and all of the governing bodies at the moment, and the funding will still continue. But there will be a point in time where things will start changing, but it's not going to be immediate. It's not going to be in the immediate future, because we all know the way Parliament works, and you know, even if there's a change of government, there'll be a slowdown in procedures. So. Yeah,
Great.
And I don't, yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a question here, but Father Frank or Kate, what does a yes outcome look like for our nation, our identity?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it is a subtle but meaningful change in direction. So it's not the silver bullet, it's not going to fix everything overnight. But I think we can hold our head high and say what we had was not working and we're trying something different now. Right. And we have actually very overdue recognised the role of First Nations people in the country. And that I think is, when I was Aboriginal Affairs Manager at Wesfarmers, I was very focused to start with on the practical outcomes. You know, doing a reconciliation action plan, it's about relationships, respect and opportunities. And I was very focused on, we've got to focus on opportunities. That's the jobs, that's what's going to make the difference. And then I realised about a year later how wrong I was, that if you walk into Kmart and you're followed around by the security guard, you're not going to apply for a job there. And that we have to get the respect right and the relationships right and do that foundational work so that the opportunities follow. Now that is a slow turning of the ship, but it means that hopefully in 10 years, in 20 years' time, we won't be looking at the same gap in the Closing the Gap report, and we will actually have seen a shift in thinking, a shift in how we approach these issues, and start to see some real shifts as well. From a practical perspective, the day after, then the legislative work starts, and following the usual parliamentary processes and working in consultation with Aboriginal communities across the country, looking at the mechanics of what that representative body looks like. And that will continue to be refined over time. I don't think we'll get it right straight up, but just as we improve other parts of our legislation and our system, we will continue to improve that so that it plays that useful role in providing advice.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kate. Okay, we've got a question over, at the back. Thank you.
I'm not quite sure how to word this, but here goes. I'm concerned that it's not going to go far enough, and I don't know how Aboriginal community leaders feel about being told that they'll have a seat at the table and that people will be obligated to listen to them, but they won't be obligated to act, to actually really take it on board. Co-design obviously is part of this, and you've got a lot more power when you're part of those decisions in the design process. I understand that. But is it not offensive to be told that you're going to be listened to, but no one's going to be obligated to listen and then act and follow your advice? That's my question.
Tyson.
Well, I think that's the whole invitation that we're having right now. You know, the Uluru Statement from Heart is inviting the Australian people to accept us into the Constitution and also to listen to us. And I really feel, and I do acknowledge that it might not go far enough, but it's in the play we have right now. But when you think about the voice and that the concern that it will be listened to but ignored and no action will come from it, what kind of gives me some confidence about it is that the voice is the First Nations-led evidence. You know, it's the weight of the voice that will compel someone to listen. Because imagine if you have all that evidence, someone saying this is what you need to do and this is how you're going to do it in that community, and that person goes against it, who's going to be at the door for not doing their job? So, you know, I would rather listen to the expert and who would tell me, you know, have all the skills and the knowledge on how that community works. So that's what kind of, in response to your question.
Fantastic. Okay. Frank.
Do you remember Sir David Lange, who was Prime Minister of New Zealand? I was once at a conference discussing these sorts of issues in 1989, and Lange was the after-dinner speaker. And to be very blunt, he was drunk. And he got up and he laughed at us Australians. He said, "You Australians are always looking for the final answer on these things." He said, "There is no final answer. Right. There are durable solutions which last a generation or two." We've had the 1967 referendum. After the 1967 referendum, everyone woke up and said, well, that's it, it's all fixed, it's all hunky-dory. Then we had you know, land rights in the Northern Territory, all fixed, hunky-dory, native title, Mabo, all fixed, hunky-dory, Aboriginal apology. If there's a vote for yes on this, it'll be a step in the journey. Where's the journey going to end ultimately? Who knows? But each step, I think, is about drawing the line together, that we own this as a nation and we move together on whatever the next step might be. So I'm not too worried about, you know, is it enough? I think it's more than there is there at the moment, and it is what people are asking for. So I'd say embrace it and be hopeful.
Can I add, I think also you have to remember that from a pragmatic perspective that Parliament and government needs to weigh up the interests of the whole population and make decisions on that basis. So if we had something that obligated, you know, that could veto law or, you know, block laws or pass laws, ultimately I think then it starts to get into what we had heard some scare campaigns about, you know, things grinding to a halt. It's part of that difficult process of governing is weighing up different interests. But government actually wants to develop policy that works in this area. And that's why I think the advisory voice will carry weight and will be effective, because there is a will to actually do things that work.
Fantastic. Okay, in the interest of time, folks, we've got 2 more questions and we'll start to wrap up.
I happen to be, and I can't explain why, listening to Martin Luther King speak today regarding a different matter, and I was minded that Martin Luther King never said, I have a plan. Martin Luther King never said, I have a strategy. Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. And his dream was that people would be treated equally. And that allowed people from many groups to sit next to him and to walk with him and to gather in Washington, D.C., 250,000 people. My concern, and no slight upon politicians, but I blame the politicians, we seem to have come to a point where we're voting on something that by its very nature is going to be divisive, when in fact what we needed to do was find language that all Australians agree on. Now, I understand the relatively difficult nature for some to be heard, but without a dream of, let's say, a better Australia for all, without that kind of language, what we will see, like we heard, is that bipartisan support is no longer bipartisan. And I fail to see how this kind of legislative, political solution is ever going to solve what is a much deeper, more troubling, more painful problem, which is the history of a nation. And I'm not sure that legislation can ever cure that, and that a statement about an aspiration and a dream for Australia as a whole would have been a much more powerful thing to start with.
I mean, I think this is an aspiration for Australia as a whole. You know, it is about unity. And you read the Yes pamphlet that came out today, and it is about moving in a positive direction towards unity for the whole country. Now, some say it's divisive. We are divided already. An Aboriginal kid in this country is more likely to go to prison than to university. You can't say we are not divided already. This is actually about reducing that division, and I think that is the dream that this holds. But it also has a pragmatic element in that there is thought about how we're actually going to get there.
Great, thank you, Kate. We've got one last question over.
Sorry.
Sorry, Kelsi. Yeah.
What Kate was saying, I think it just goes back to my point earlier about the exclusion part. We were specifically excluded from the creation of the Constitution when it was done in 1901. So to say that we are equal now and that we, were part of the founding document and founding of this country is incorrect. And I think, to rectify that, we have to move forward on a path together. And I think, I agree with Kate in terms of what she's saying about the Uluru Statement from the Heart being a statement that we as Australians can move forward together in order to recognise us and our special status in this country as the First Peoples.
Fantastic. Thanks, folks. Okay, one last question over here, thanks.
Hi. I think often people may shy away from politics or staying informed because it can feel overcomplicated, or they might think as though these issues don't necessarily affect them. But I would like to know why this panel feels as though this is an issue that should matter to all Australians, Indigenous or not Indigenous, and why a well-informed vote is important.
I've been talking too much. Someone else should have a go.
What? I think it's important for a couple of reasons. I think there are a couple of points of what I would call deep philosophical cleavage, which are still there in the Australian community, which haven't been addressed. And because we all have to vote, we all have to think about those philosophical points. And it's very important for the future of the country that we do. One of those philosophical points is that one of, Martin Luther King's dream, for example, about treating everyone equally. What does that mean? And we've had in the United States just recently a decision of the US Supreme Court about affirmative action programs for entry to Harvard. A bench split very solidly, 6-3. All you've got to do is read the two African Americans on that court who are diametrically opposed about notions of equality. Now, that same debate about equality is at play here in Australia. And if any doubt about that, I was recalling with the teachers here, in 1988, the first item of business in the new Parliament House related to a recognition of Aboriginal entitlements. And it was designed by the 14 church leaders in cooperation with significant Indigenous leaders like Patrick Dodson. And it came unstuck in the end because the coalition party said they could not agree to the term self-determination subject to the Constitution and laws of the Commonwealth of Australia, that it had to be further qualified by self-determination in common with all other Australians. Now, those words were disputed in 1988. 35 years later, they are still disputed philosophically amongst us as a nation. The second point of philosophical cleavage is this. Between 1993 and 2007, there was universal agreement that constitutional recognition of First Australians was about something that was symbolic. It was about saying we recognise something about the history, the present reality and the future aspirations. There emerged a new generation of Indigenous leaders, people like Pearson and Langton and Davis, etc. Now what they said was, we're no longer interested in minimal symbolic change, because guess what? That only works for the benefit of the white fellas. It doesn't actually make a difference in the lives of us, the Indigenous Australians. So what we want is constitutional recognition which has got real power, which has got some grunt. Now that is a remaining point of difference in the Australian community. Most Australians, London to a brick, would vote in favour of constitutional recognition, full stop. But constitutional recognition with a voice which might have some oomph is what divides us. It's very important that we have those two discussions. What is the nature of equality and what is the nature of recognition of First Australians, that we conduct those conversations respectfully and that we have real respect for those who do not share our views. Because guess what? On equality, the US Supreme Court 6-3, both sides have valid arguments. And in terms of powerful recognition in the Constitution, both sides have a point to make. So we have to vote in good conscience.
Can I add my answer to why you should care? I think there is a deep injustice in our country, and it has been built into our foundational document for 120 years. This is our opportunity to seek justice and to actually right that. We need to be brave and humble. We need to say, we are not good at this. And we can see that, and we need to be hopeful that we can actually do better in the future. So this is the opportunity to change the trajectory and for you to be part of becoming the country that we all think that we can be.
At a very practical level, I lived for 9 years out in a remote Aboriginal community amongst the Madu people in the Western Desert. And when I left, the average life expectancy of a Madu man was 49 years of age, and for a woman, it was 51 years of age. I turned 48 the other day. I have a 4.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. If I'm standing in Madu's shoes in front of you today, I'm not going to see my child become an adult. I'm not going to see my grandchildren born. We enjoy first world status, yet our Aboriginal counterparts in many parts of our country exist in fourth world status. And from my perspective, as a privileged white man, I'm not going to live to accept that. So I challenge you to walk alongside us for change into the future. I'd like to say a very big thank you, firstly to Daniel and the college for your leadership and hosting us this evening. These are message sticks. I stand here today, I guess, 6 generations West Australian, and proudly so. I stand alongside my Aboriginal friends and colleagues, and they stand here with 3,000 generations beside them. They've used these for millennia, and they're a means of expressing their purpose, a means of demonstrating integrity, and one will develop this one. It's got a wattle leaf in the middle, and it's a message of truth and reconciliation. So, Daniel, thank you to you and the college for hosting this evening and for the very valuable conversation that we've had. Colleen, can I ask you to give these to our panellists? Oh, yep, beautiful. There you go. So there's some symbols and a story on the back for those of you who received one, and yeah, please do. So, folks, Kate Chaney, Tyson McEwan, Fr Frank Brennan, Kelsi Forrest, and Colene Castle. I think, just as a closing remark, there's a danger to only think, and Janine, thank you for these very wise words. There's a danger to think about these issues only with our head, to intellectualise things. We trust that our conversation here tonight has touched your hearts, particularly when reminded how painful it is for many of our first Australians to only be considered as intellectual curiosities, rather than fellow Australians who want to be respected and counted, who have hopes and dreams for their children and their children's children. Moving forwards, we need a clear plan for our nation, a clear plan of how we will get some skin in the game. So moving into this referendum, we ask, what does it mean to you? What does it mean for your family, our community, and importantly, our nation? So folks, thank you all for your evening, and I'm sorry I haven't managed the time particularly well, but I trust that you've enjoyed our evening, and I'd ask that you just put your hands together again for our panel.